So, Vince, how
Hey,
do you feel about horses?
you know, um, I hear they're good for troubled children who have like ADHD, and I feel I might have benefited from horses in my life, but I didn't, even though I grew up in the suburbs, I didn't grow up around horses. And the one time I ever got on one, I was in my late 40s, and that was the only time I'll ever get on a horse.
Really?
It was terrifying. But I could see the appeal, but I'm like, I don't need to be riding a horse. I've gone 40 some years of my life without ever being on a horse. Why am I doing this now? And yeah, so I'm glad I did it. I can say I've ridden one horse in my life, and that was enough.
Wow. Okay. Okay. This is not the direction I thought we were going to go in, but we're going to do this now. I fucking loved horses growing up. I was
Really?
obsessed with horses. I loved everything about them. I was a big fan of like the Black Stallion books. I read Black Beauty, which will come up in a minute. There was a horse. I don't know what you call it. There's a place that had horses, had like three horses just down the road from where I grew up, and I like helped clean their stables. I loved being around the horses. I rode a horse like a couple times, a few times I've ridden horses in Iceland most recently, but I have several times. But the first time I rode a horse, I was riding a horse at like one of these training like for kids. I was probably like 12, 13, and riding the horse in a circle, totally fine. It's walking slow. And then there was a mare that was on the side, and my horse got like super horny and like tried to hump this mare while I was on it. And they're yelling about like, rein it in, rein it in. I'm like yanking back, and this horse, this stallion, I suppose is the right word, is trying to like get off on this other horse. Weirdest, most like traumatized experience in my horse riding life. And it was years after that before I got on a horse. So
I think for me it is something where I grew up in a weird place where you are 15 minutes outside of the city of Chicago,
Mhm.
which is sort of urban-ish, but you're not deep. But it's also like when I was in high school, we moved around a lot when I was a kid, but the town that we ended up in when I was in high school is called Willow Springs, Illinois, and it's a kind of forest preserve heavy little town. It's kind of Twin Peaks-ish.
Ooh.
So like there was a dead body in the creek outside of our place at one point. It's a very weird
Oh
place.
yeah.
And very interesting, storied, corrupt little town. But like it was kind of in this country. It felt like you could easily feel like you were in the country, but also close to the city. So I was never quite like a country kid or like a small town Midwestern, like there's horses in my life kid.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you're not quite from the city. So all the city kids would be like, ah, you fucking suburban,
Heck.
piece of shit. Yeah, exactly. But you're
Heck.
not quite like a hick and you're not quite like an urbanite. So I feel like I should have had horses in my life more, and maybe I would have appreciated them more, especially if there was a horny horse trying to like hump a mare. That's something I'm sure as a young person I would have delighted in that as a visual. But no, none of that. But
Yep,
anyway,
yes, super fun, super fun. So you're listening to the Mining the Dalkey Archive podcast, an occasional podcast in which we talk about Dalkey books, talk to Dalkey authors, talk to Dalkey translators, and today Vince Francone, who has been on this podcast several times, and we always talk about Irish books. And today we're talking about Eileen Battersby's Teethmarks on My Tongue, which is part of the Irish literature series. However, she's American, born in America, and the book is about America, and the book is about horses, which is why that's our good intro. So,
that was a good intro. That was very like if books could kill kind of intro where we're
oh,
just talking.
dude, you listen to books if books could
Oh
kill?
yeah, of course, of course. I love
Greatest
that podcast.
podcast in the world.
Yeah, it's great stuff. So yeah.
100%. I thought of that as I was going in there. So I'm glad you caught the reference.
Well, anyway, how you doing, Chad? Good to
Not
see
good,
you.
man. I was walking home from the university, and I don't know, like 10 minutes from home, my hamstring popped.
What?
And so I've got some whiskey in this little cup here because I am in a lot of pain. And I think, like a horse, I should just be taken out back, shot, and made into glue.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how,
You're like Boxer and Animal Farm. You've served your purpose.
yes, I have no secretariat. That's I'm not going to win any races for the next I don't know how many weeks until
Uh,
this hills, but it'll be fine.
well,
Dude,
sorry to hear it. Are you may I ask which whiskey you're drinking or what do
it's
what's
just
in the
Jim
cup?
Beam, man. I'm a cheap whiskey drinker right now.
Interesting. I thought for the Irish thing we would do like Tullamore or something, but I'm also drinking I'm drinking Scotch, so it's
Nice.
not in theme either. So we're both betraying the theme.
I was gonna stop and get some, but I was waylaid. I couldn't. I was gonna get Tell 'em or Do, my favorite.
Telemarketer is pretty. It's. I mean, this is a tangent we can go for a second, but if you're gonna spend a comparable amount of money to something like Jameson, you might as well get Tullamore because it's a dash better in my mind.
I agree. I agree. But I do love Jameson. I'm partial. I love both of
Jameson's,
them. Big
yeah,
fan.
and Teeling if you really want to
Feeling's
splash
so
out.
good.
Yeah,
Redbreast.
Redbreast. Oh God, I feel bad that I didn't realize how expensive Redbreast is, and I had some at Exile and Bookville. They have a little bit of
Yeah.
booze stashed, and Javier is nice enough to me to occasionally be like, "Yeah, you want to have a cocktail?" I'm like, "Yeah." So he's like, "Help yourself to anything," and I helped myself. This is when Mark Haber was in town. I helped myself to a very healthy silo cup of Redbreast, thinking, it's Irish whiskey. I like Irish whiskey," and it was quite good. And then a few weeks later, I was at a Binny's, and I'm like, "Wow, that's a quite an expensive bottle that I just helped myself to." I feel kind of bad.
Yeah.
Like,
It depends on the age. Depends on the age, obviously. But
true, true.
nevertheless, I should have. I was in India last month, and through their duty free, all the duty free prices are in rupees, and I could have gotten any of that stuff like dirt ass
Hmm.
cheap. And I thought about it, but I would have had to keep transporting it all the way back to New York City and then back to Rochester. And I was like, I'm
No.
whatever. But anyway, so with this book, so what do you know about Eileen Battersby? Not to go back to the If Books Could Kill setup.
What do I know? I want to do something snarky and funny like they do, but I no, I'll be serious. Honestly, only what I Googled, which is frankly just like a brief Wikipedia page entry that I read about her, that she was born in America, but I don't know if she lived most of her life in Ireland or enough of it to sort of be
Seems like
considered.
it.
Yeah, and she was a book critic, and this is her only novel, and she died young of I don't know what. I kind of forgot the entry already.
Yeah, she died at 62. She was involved in an accident, a
Oh.
single vehicle accident in Old Bridge. So she died the day after that. So really, bad. A tragic death, not like even a tragic cancer death, a tragic car accident death. So
Hmm.
not the best. But yeah, she was like a longtime critic for the Irish Times. Have you read any of her criticism by any chance?
No, which I would like to because I did read. I went down the little bit of a rabbit hole where on the Wikipedia page it mentions that she gave a poor review to Dermot Healy's last book, and I love Dermot Healy, so that was fascinating. But in response to that, the Irish writer Eugene McCabe, I guess, really just took her to task in print, maybe even in the Irish Times, and said like, I read a story by Miss Battersby and it was terrible. So who's she to talk? Basically that kind of a theme. And it sort of felt like that generation's Irish writers kind of like sticking together against this younger upstart critic who dared take one of the sort of established writers to task for maybe writing an overly sentimental novel, which if you've read Healy, like the one book novel of his I've read is A Goat Song, which is great, but I could easily see that same kind of theme being repeated. A lot of people they repeat their best work as they get older and maybe diminished some of their best work. They kind of water it down. So I haven't read it, so I can't speak to her review and its accuracy. But I can kind of see like she was not necessarily an upstart, but not afraid to kind of say, you know what, you're not resting in your laurels here. I'm going to review this honestly, which I admire. When I read that, I kind of thought, okay, she's interesting. I like that.
I do too. Unfortunately, when I'm on campus or VPN'd in, I can access the Irish Times, but it will not let me load this up for you.
Oh,
The title is From Chatty Comments to Chilling Observations. And it did generate a ton of like people writing into the paper,
hmm,
including an article called Another Take on Long Time No See. This is
hmm.
Madam. I've just read Eileen Battersby's Olympian review of Dermot Healy's Long Time No See. She presses all the right buttons and then it cuts me off.
Ah,
I do have a few of them still open here that I can access. I feel bad about that. I wish I would maybe put something in the show notes or whatever. But there's like a very good review of Vernon Subutex, volumes one
hmm,
and volume two. I'm not sure she was alive for volume three. And then there's an amazingly like smackdown of the Golden House by Salman Rushdie. That's
really?
really fun. It's very funny. And it's not like it's just basically it's called yawningly long more florid
Wow.
prose from Salman Rushdie. Repeat.
Wow.
The Golden House is a messy soap opera full of cliche and sexism. It's kind of amazing. There's some good parts in here. Let me see if I can find a good thing. It basically I have not read this book, but She says, keep your eyes peeled for the Joker, who instead of having an orange face, glories in green hair. Why? Ask Rushdie, unless a ploy to deflect lawyers. The quote, the origins of the Joker were disputed. A man himself seemed to enjoy allowing contradictory versions to fight for airspace, but on one fact, everyone, passionate supporter and bitter antagonist, was agreed. He was utterly and certifiably insane. What was astonishing, what made this an election year like no other, was that people backed him because he was insane, not in spite of it. And then she goes on to talk about how there's Russian oligarchs, blah, blah, blah. She says even the mildest feminist would be offended at an appalling sequence in which Vasilisa, a Russian beauty, sets out to win old Nero Golden, who's, I believe, the Trump stand-in, and having done so, then goes out drinking with him and her female personal trainer. The women retire for a night of sexual engagement, leaving the old man seething. But rather than lose her golden goose, Vasilisa, a cynical mix of Lady Macbeth and Cruella de Vil, makes a stomach-churning sexual barter-based apology to Nero to secure him, which leaves one wondering at Rushdie's attitude towards women.
Wow.
So, yeah, she goes after it. I did go get from the library though this book, which I don't know how to show you this. There it is. Second readings, which are
No,
52 books that she reread essentially and wrote
nice.
about in this book. So reread over, I guess, a year. So like book a week, whatever, and sort of revisiting like old classics, things that she likes, so on and so forth. The reason I bring this up specifically is that one of the books she absolutely loves in here is Black Beauty. To tie this all into our horse theme
Nice.
of the day, which will make more sense to everyone in maybe a second. Where'd it go? It is page.
Black Beauty.
She does have a review of All Quiet on the Western Front, which shows up in Teethmarks on My Tongue as well.
Mhm.
And then Black Beauty, she praises it. And I remember reading this book as a kid, and I mean, she's really into like the idea of like Black Beauty being like mistreated by people and like so on and so
Mhm.
forth. And apparently Anna Sewell was only wrote this novel, which I did not know. Blah blah blah. This is a book from the point of view of a horse, which is something I abhor. Like I hate animals that are speaking in books, but I remember loving this book as a child, and I'm wondering what happened. What
To
was
you,
wrong
you
with me
mean?
then, or what? Yeah, what happened?
Well, maybe here we'll put you on the couch for a second. Why do you hate animals having a voice in
Because
books? I mean, I'm thinking like I'm trying to think of an example of that in a book, and the only one I can think of is a brief moment in Stephen King's Cujo, which I read in high school.
Animal Farm, no,
Oh yeah, well there's that. But
Watership Down, but those are different examples. I think that when a book includes like a point of view of an animal, it's bullshit. It's just like inventing like a very humanized, like anthropomorphized way of like talking about an animal's point of view. And I find it just like brings up so many questions about how irrational this is and like how like unbelievable it is that I just
Mhm.
do not like it.
I could see that. I mean, if it's Animal Farm, it's different. I'm thinking that's a
Right.
different example because it's the whole conceit of the book. But like, I get it because that was the thing that I remember in high school. I read because I was
All
reading
Lost is
every Stephen King.
Timbuktu.
I haven't read that. Yeah, I'm woefully underread. I've only read the New York trilogy and I think one other that I forgot. It's not bad. I just don't go back to him often. But like I remember reading Cujo as a kid because I was reading all the Stephen King books in high school, like one after the other, and and I remember feeling Cujo's dying at the end, and it's just spoiler, I guess. And it does come from his point of view. There's like one chapter where he's just like, Cujo just wanted to be a good boy and all these things. And I remember thinking, this is so sad, and it tore me up. And then I finished reading it, and the next day I'm like, that was manipulative bullshit. Like I got very angry at it because it worked. It's like if you've ever seen a movie that's like that makes you kind of cry and you hate yourself for doing it because you're like, it's the movie is engineered to do this,
Yep.
to elicit this. It feels a little cheap.
Like Wes Anderson. Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls, I
Oh,
think that's the name. That one broke me as a kid. I
that's a
was
rough,
crying for
that's a
ass.
rough, yeah, that's a hard book. They should, well, maybe this is a mild, we're jumping in this, but I'm going to say if I have any criticism with teeth marks on my tongue, as a guy who literally does go to doesthedogdie.com occasionally, if I think there's a dog in a horror movie that I'm going to see like terribly murdered, I'm going to spoil it. The fucking dog dies, and I don't love that because,
My God, see, I hate dogs. So nowadays, so I'm good with all dog death. more or less.
Nah, yeah. I mean, I'm never having children, so my dogs are like the closest I'm going to. And I was not this guy until way late in life. And then suddenly one day my wife's like, "We're getting a dog." I'm like, "We are?" And like today we're getting and I'm like, "Oh." And I was fighting it, of course, like every stereotype, and now I've immediately become a softie to dogs. Like walking on the street, I ask to pet people's dogs. I'm that guy. And so it's sort of pathetic because I'm watching like the Babadook and the dog dies, and I'm like, fucking hell, horror movies. It's such a cheap thing to do to kill the dog to get like people, it's just a thing that happens all the time. So when I was reading this, I'm like, Hector, cool. I kind of love this. And then it's so abrupt, like every other death in this book is so abrupt, it just happens. And it kind of shocked me. I was like, oh my God, why am I affected by this?
That's
It's
so
not written in a
interesting.
way that's like it's not like written in a way to generate sympathy and pain. It's not like overly emotive. It's just
Yeah.
it happens, and it just was like poor Hector.
So I'm gonna tie this into the biggest point that I have in my notes
Okay,
about this book, okay? Is I cannot name a number, I cannot name maybe any other books that I've read, fiction works by people who are critics, but taking this as a point of view of like she's as a critic writing a novel for the first time. And I think that what drives this book a lot is an avoidance of like big tropes. And like the one that you're pointing to now, dog dying maybe is a trope, but the one that I think of as you're describing that is that all the deaths are very sudden and
hmm
like on they're emotional in a way, but not really, not in the way
no,
that I think like a lot of authors would play this book out. So, I mean, maybe to set this up, it's the story of Helen,
hmm
who is a young kid. I have a question about how old she is. In Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia. So immediately, like, I was expecting this to be in Ireland. I kept being like, "Where's Richmond, Ireland? I don't even know." And at some point, I'm like, "No, they're in Virginia." And her father raises horses and is a veterinarian, like a very famous horse veterinarian to some degree. And they live in some sort of like, quasi, colonial sounding, big space in Virginia. Her mom has been having an affair with this dude who's very like Gatsby-esque, I guess, in a way, or like, but very much more like young Werther romantics vibes. And on like page one, he fucking shoots her mom on TV, and because they're filming like a commercial, and he shoots her during that. She dies, and this girl is then like left with her father and her horses. She loves horses. She really loves horses. And she's has just been at the beginning of the book also been like beaten up by a horse that she then proceeds to like become very good at riding. Her father sells it out from under her ass, I suppose is the way you would put that. And then she decides to flee. She also loves astronomy. She wants to be a scientist. Her dad like is like, "You're never going to do that. You're a historian. You're not a scientist." And so she flees to France, ends up working at a horse farm for a while. There is a sexual assault or not a, I guess it's, I mean, it is sexual assault, but not like a rape, I suppose,
hmm
to try and designate those two with a guy. But then she goes to a horse, gets a job at a horse farm in like the south of France, I guess,
hmm
and falls in love with a dude. There's like drama over that at the end that we'll get to. He dies abruptly, as did her mom. Then she's there because she's got found this dog in Paris, and she's like, "I'm gonna take care of this dog," and the dog's old, and then the dog dies abruptly, and she's like, "You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to Germany," and she goes to Germany, and then at the end she wants to die, and then spoilers. Well, let's save the spoiler part of the very ending part of this
okay.
for
We'll,
later,
we'll
and then we'll
we'll save that.
denote it because hopefully along the way here, some people might want to buy and read this book. And then when we hit the spoiler moment, then talk about that because we kind of have to. Um,
Yeah.
we'll note that. So if you are listening and are planning on reading it, you can just like shut this off. So
Yeah.
save that for the end. But with all those things, like a lot of the tropes that I expected to show up that would I think would show up in like the hands of a lesser writer are sort of like stripped away or moved off from in a way that made me think that she's writing this as a critic
hmm
rather than like as someone who's coming up through like a MFA program or whatever.
Yeah, that's good. I absolutely agree, and that's maybe what kept me. There's no reason that this book, executed by a writer who's sort of obeying the rules, I guess we'll say, should have interested me, frankly, which sounds a little bad, but it's a guy it's sold as a coming of age book, which I guess it is.
Sort of.
And it has that. It's a precocious young woman who's very intelligent, and she definitely has her fixations, horses being a huge one, obviously. And it's almost like Catcher in the Rye. And you mentioned Wes Anderson kind of derisively a second ago, but like if there's a trope in a Wes Anderson movie, it's basically young people acting like adults, even when they're adults and they're kind of in arrested development, they still act like they're acting above their age in a weird
Yeah,
way.
that
If
makes
you think
sense.
about like that movie where everyone's camping that I can't remember the name, Moonrise Kingdom, I think it's and so forth. But it's the same thing. It's like she's very, very intelligent and precocious, and she doesn't just like go to Europe to France. She just like takes off without telling her dad basically and kind of runs away and doesn't really like she just sends postcards back to her best friend and all these things. It's very
Your
she's
quote
kind
unquote
of
best friend.
yeah, her frenemy, I guess, is maybe more accurate. But all those things are not, I mean, this is not unlike, say, like a Catcher in the Rye kind of a thing where it's like precocious, maybe more intelligent than your average young person, but also probably not as intelligent as they think they are. Thinks
Hmm.
they're like world weary, but not really world weary. There's a lot of those books that you can think of and point to. And I this isn't like those. It's very different. It's sort of disobeying maybe the tropes, as you say, of a book like that, of a kind of coming of age book with that kind of thing. And the deaths are there, and they're so. That's what struck me the most. Is she's sort of cursed. I mean, she even says at one point that she thinks she's cursed, and that her mother cursed her because everyone around her does kind of die. And I love that. Like, but it happens in a way that's not detached
Oh,
in a way like the stranger. Mother died today. But it's at the same time, it's just so abrupt. I was shocked when all these deaths were shocking
she
to
says
me.
at some point, she's like, I should really be more emotionally upset about my mom. Like, another person that dies that we skipped over was Billy. Is it Billy Bob? Am I making that up? Is that okay? It is Billy Bob, who's like the horse trainer at the on the farm, who helps get her to like break this mare or break this stout, whatever, break a horse. Get the horse like that's very like active, the one that beats her up at the first part and
Yeah.
kicks her, to like break that horse and tame it. And then when his favorite horse Monticello dies, he vanishes, and she assumes that he either drank himself into the grave or he buried himself with the horse because the horse is the only thing he loved. He also just dies essentially or vanishes abruptly.
Gone. Yeah.
One of the things that you just mentioned that was one of the tropes that I was like, this is one that would be played out totally different in a different book, is that when she does just like go to France, she's won $10,000 from like a science fair competition, by writing about Galileo, which is her kind of
Mhm.
obsession and is the name of the horse that gets sold out from under her. And she wins that $10,000. She goes to France and she never, ever has a money problem. She refers frequently to how she has plenty of money. She's taken care of. She has a job. She's paid a lot. She's like fine. She can do whatever she wants. So that whole idea of like, I'm going to go struggle and find my way. And like, this is something like, how do you make it in this big bad world as like a young, precocious kid? Totally washed off the board. And it's
Mhm.
like referred to enough to be like, I feel like that was an intentional, like, this always shows up in these sort of books and I'm
Mhm.
not going to do it. Like we don't
Yeah.
money is not the goal here.
Yeah. This isn't like Ragged Dick and Horatio Alger thing. This is like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to go. And it's so, and she just is in France. That's the other thing is it's like a James Bond movie where suddenly he's jet setting it. He's in Mumbai or something. It's like, oh, how'd that happen? It's just the one section ends, the next one begins, and she's like, I'm in France. And I'm
Yep.
like, oh, okay. All right. There's no, I need to escape. I need to get away. It just happens. And I kind of like that everything in this book just kind of happens
Same.
without a
Like
lot of that like or artifice and ornament.
right. It's like such a plain ass book on so many levels. Like the writing is plain, the like sort of story is plain. I mean, mostly the most of the story after she loves her horses. She has to escape from her dad because he sold her horse. She goes to France. She works on the horses. Then she goes to Germany exclusively to see the paintings, like
Yes.
of the person whose name I'm blanking out on.
Casper David.
Yep.
I
Casper
always I
David,
always want to say Casper Hauser because of the
for
Herzog
sure.
movie, but not no Casper David I believe is the artist.
Yep. And The Wanderer in particular is like
Yeah.
her favorite painting. And so she just goes to like these various cities throughout Germany where his paintings are held and like looks at paintings. Like what a flat ass book.
Not to mention, speaking of that, when she's in Germany, she's going between East and West Berlin, and
No big deal.
it's not like she doesn't talk about the Stasi and like she almost doesn't remember the name. She's like, what do they call those people again? Oh yeah, the Stasi. And she almost and she talks about going through Checkpoint Charlie, but she doesn't make it like a big dramatic thing. It's not like that movie The Post by Spielberg where like Tom Hanks is watching people get shot at Checkpoint Charlie. It's just kind of a, well, I got so used to it, and maybe because I have this passport, they just wave me through. It's so there's so it's so undramatic. For a lot of
It's
dramatic things that go on in this book, there's not a lot of like heavy pathos and things like that.
there's like no melodrama. Like there's like a little hints of it or like where you would see more, but like there's really not. And like we are saying about like crossing the border, at first she's like, this is kind of weird. And especially because she has two different colored eyes, which comes up a
Mhm.
million times, right?
Yeah.
And then her passport doesn't look like her anywhere because I assume, and this is a question for you, she has a passport from when she was a child and now she is an older adolescent.
Hmm.
So like let's say that the passport's from when she's like 13 and now she's 18. So like maybe I don't know
I
how
don't
old.
know. I don't know how old she
Super
is.
confused
And
by
I
that.
thought this was me. I thought that maybe I had not read closely and I missed it. And but I don't remember how old she is. I just know that at a certain point when she's in Virginia, she is the age that she is. And not a lot of time passes, but I'm guessing at least, let's say it's a year. I don't know, maybe, I don't know.
But
But she
she's like,
can't be, she's still in her teens. She's not, when she gets assaulted in Paris, I got the impression that she was still underage.
see,
Like
I
she
got the
wasn't
impression
18.
that she was out of high school and would be of age.
Okay. I
Like that
wasn't
she was
sure.
18. That's why I keep thinking she's like 18.
I
Like,
kept thinking 16 maybe, but
because
maybe
she
not.
wins the science competition, I believe, as like a senior in high school.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And then after that, like some time passes and she leaves after that. Like,
Okay.
because she wins, it's in the paper. Her dad takes a shit on her and says, like, this isn't science, this is history. You're only interested in history. You'll never be a scientist like I am, blah, blah, blah. And is like a overbearing, like, I suppose, like, sort of Irish dad in that sense that or how Irish dads show up in a lot of Irish fiction. But then she leaves sometime after that. So I believe that she would be like presumably 18
Okay.
to like erase that part of it. Because also, like, when you say the sexual assault, so she goes to Paris, it's like her first day or some shit. And she's
It's
like
pretty
at a cafe.
quick.
Yeah, she's like, this is immediately, this seems like a bad city to be in for like a young child. She does also frequently with the age thing, she's constantly telling people like her parents are on their way. Her parents are like, okay with her
Hmm.
being there. Like people think she's super young and like underage. And that's why I kept kind of tripping over that as to like, I don't know how old you can be, but I also don't know how much time she spends at the ranch in the south of France. That could be like a year. Um,
Easily.
so she should be old enough that people aren't like, where are your parents at? But
Hmm.
she also like looks like a child because she's skinny and like tomboyish, has the weird eye thing going on, which didn't strike me as super weird. I don't know that I can picture anyone like that, but also is like, well, if I saw someone with two different colored eyes, I would be like, that's pretty rad.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean it's
that's
David
cool.
Bowie is the only one I can think of.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
Bowie eyes, but even Bowie eyes, it's a striking feature that adds to his otherworldliness, you know, and that's of course what I kept thinking. Bowie's one of my favorites, but it's just like even that, you see enough photos of Bowie in your life or
Yeah.
videos, and it's like not that big a deal.
No,
So
didn't
yeah, you
even
barely
realize.
clock it after a while.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. But yes, I don't know how old she is, but that the French thing, when she gets to France, she gets to Paris and like she's at a cafe and some guy's there, presumably with like a rose and like does he has a musical instrument, but I don't remember
yeah,
what it was.
he's this is maybe the thing I love. Like this is the part of the book I kind of almost love the most, as horrible as it sounds, that I love the assault the most.
Yeah.
But it is like he's a charming in every sort of stereotypical way, because I don't remember what he's playing, but you're right, he is kind of seducing her with like flowers and music and kind of a charming Parisian man about town.
And he's
And
pretending to wait for his girlfriend, or she
yeah,
thinks he is.
yeah. And it's sort of almost it should be the kind of cliche of, I fell for Jacques, he
Yeah,
swept me off my feet, but
always
then
think that.
immediately the rug gets pulled out from like her and from us, which is what I liked about that.
Absolutely. So he like gets her really high on
Yeah.
weed, I believe. And she pukes all over herself, and he's like, "I'll
Yeah.
take care of you. I'll take care of you. I can wash your clothes, blah blah blah." And then like tries to sexually assault her, but she like doesn't. What I thought was really
Nope.
interesting about this scene, she's like, this is not gonna happen, and then she like does get sexually assaulted, like R. Kelly style, when she goes
Yeah.
into like go to the bathroom and he pisses on her, but like then she like goes back to bed. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I'll just leave. And he's like, go get me this stuff. You're gonna give me this stuff. Get this stuff. He stole all her money, but she's got more money in her hidden in her shoe. She's like resourceful and like not concerned about that part of it. And she's just like, okay, I'll go get the stuff from the store. And she's like, peace, brother. I'm never gonna see you
Yeah.
again.
If I remember correctly, she even says like, "Well, you stole all my money. How am I going to pay for this?" And he gives her some back.
And he gives her
So
some
it's like,
back. Yeah.
and
Like,
then she takes off, and it's such a strange scene because it immediately made me think of Taken, the Liam Neeson movie,
oh,
which as much as I kind of am fine watching a wonderful movie where Liam Neeson kills 130 people or whatever he does, the joke of that movie to me has always been like the Onion's review even said this, like he warns his daughter, "You go to Paris, something could happen," and then on day one something happens. It's kind of ridiculous. It's like every parent's fear is like,
yeah.
I know the world, it's terrible, and then immediately like she gets abducted. It's kind of like that where it's like she goes to Paris, she meets this guy, he seems charming, and then he turns out to be horrible. He fucking pisses on her
Yeah.
because she won't
Literally.
sleep with him. She won't succumb to his assault. And like I guess to his credit, he doesn't rape her, but he just
Right.
pisses on her. He still assaults her sexually. It's horrible. And then you're right. She just is like, well, that was bad. Well, I'm going to get 40 winks now. And then she leaves in the morning. It was so strange.
So
I don't know
strange.
what to make of that scene at all.
I don't either. And she does like insult his penis frequently throughout the
Yes.
book. The stubby, like a stubby penis, I think she refers to it. Which is funny. But like it's so nonchalant. Like so much of this book is nonchalant in a way. But she does, I mean, what's interesting though is that she does think about it again. Like we're always in her head, although I do have a question about that. We're always kind of in her head as she's recounting things, and she'll be like, oh, like fucking Mark. And then she like goes back to Paris and is like, well, what if Mark's there? And she's like, no, it's a big city. I'm not going to
Yeah.
see this guy ever again. And like just goes about her life. And it's like a
Hmm.
weird way of like non-trauma, like a very traumatizing incident. Or like she processes it in like either lightning fast speed or in a way that's just like, that happened, that's bad, not going to happen again. I'm aware now.
That's just, I think she's compartmentalizing. And
Compartmentalizing.
I really think that that's maybe if we are going to, this is the question I'll have for you in a second, but if we're going to like psychoanalyze her, that might be something she does with all the trauma, which is why we're only given these kind of detached views of all these things, these deaths and this like assault. And that could be intentional on the author's part. But I ask you, like, the question I guess I have
No.
in tandem with this is like, I don't love psychoanalyzing characters. I kind of find it not my favorite lens through which to view literature and art. But like, my students love it. Like, we read Bartleby by Melville, and they all like, well, he's clinically depressed. They just didn't have the language for it back then. I mean, I'm not opposed to that reading, frankly, but at the same time, I guess it's a little easy.
Yeah.
And part of me wants is avoiding doing that. But I do think there might, I don't know if this is intentional on her part, but it does feel like if I can kind of see a through line with all these traumatic events that are in this book that don't feel that traumatic, it's because we are getting it filtered through Helen. And she is really, really good at just compartmentalizing, processing, or just putting it behind her. It's
Yeah.
there, but she's moving on. She's always moving somewhere.
And
So
she's
maybe
always
that,
and she's an unreliable narrator.
hmm, yeah,
Even
okay.
though nothing about it is unreliable, she leaves out there's a lot of lacuna in this book,
Hmm.
I think.
Just
I
things that you thought were just picked up and put down, kind of.
Well, that just didn't get spoken and that
Hmm.
had happened that we don't necessarily know about when they happen, but
Hmm.
maybe see the repercussions of. We'll save that though. Put a pin in that. I have a question for you though about the narrator while we're on
Sure.
that. What the fuck are these footnotes? Who the
They never
fuck
show
wrote
up.
these footnotes?
I don't have any of them.
You don't have footnotes?
Well, I suddenly realized so okay, I needed this book right away, and I found a used copy.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a terrible literary citizen for not buying it from the Dalkey Archive. But I was waiting for the footnotes because I see them in there, and the last page is torn out. So I didn't get the footnotes. I don't know what they were referring
Oh
to.
my God. Okay, so the first one is a picture. It's her going to see the painting or wanting to see the painting of Whistle Jacket and
Uh-huh.
says like it wasn't like a private place, but it gets moved to the National Gallery in London, right? And then the author's note says the footnote is the famous painting of the stallion Whistle Jacket by the artist George Stubbs, which was completed in 1762, was indeed later purchased by the National Gallery in London in 1997 for 11 million pounds sterling, or about $18 million dollars. Obviously, our narrator Helen, whose story takes place in the late 1980s, knows nothing of this, although her irritatingly astute father was proved correct by predicting it. And then the
The
second
fuck?
one is when Helen refers to her thrill on hearing any mention to Leningrad and her even greater excitement on coming across references to its former name, St. Petersburg, she is again caught within history. The city's name did not revert to St. Petersburg until 1991. So, who wrote, like,
Who wrote those
what?
footnotes?
What? Like, is that like, so it says author's notes. Is that like Eileen Battersby correcting Helen's narrative? What the fuck? Like,
Okay, so if that is, I want to believe that yes, that is, because that is next level brilliant to me. You have a narrator, and narrative unreliability is clearly a thing. But I feel like we're so used to the idea. This is very literary critic minded as well. We're
love
so
it.
used to reading from the idea of the first person unreliable narrator that we're almost jaded to the idea of the unreliable narrator. So to further reinvigorate our suspicion of the unreliability, the author herself is going to point to inconsistencies in the narrative. That's kind of brilliant.
I kind of love it, but I was like, both times I was like, wait, where's this coming from? Like,
Wow.
and in the, I read a lot of this as an ebook because it was easier to transport and
Hmm.
just easier to transport. And it went back and forth and back and forth. And in the ebook, it doesn't say author's notes; it's just footnotes. So I was like,
Hmm.
initially, just like, wait, did someone at Dalkey insert this? I don't even think like because I don't remember what year does she die? She's alive when this is published, I believe.
I
And
think so, yeah.
and I mentioned that only in one other context is that the other reason I wanted to read this book and like have had it on my shelf for so long is that the last time I saw Christopher McElhouse, the famous like founder of Harville Press, big
Hmm.
publisher, big like almost caricature of like what you expect a publisher to be and to look like and to act like, very dedicated to words and literature. Great dude. I saw him at a party in Frankfurt, and it was after John had died. Delkey was like in transition. And he's like, well, John, I was like, do you want to be interviewed to talk about your experience with John? Because I'd like to put something together about this. And he's like, oh, my stories aren't that, good, and they're kind of negative. He's like, he really did Eileen Battersby wrong. She was very
Mm.
upset. And I
Really?
do not know what more comes behind that statement at all. I never talked to him about it. We never hooked up. We had lunch or breakfast or something and talked for like an hour. That did not come up again. I did not press him on it, but it's like stuck in my mind. And so I kind of wanted to read it to see like what happened. And like when I hit those footnotes, I thought, did John insert these to like it was that part of it? And I don't think so. I think it's from Eileen. I think it's like a trick to like separate herself from the book, but also like point to her being a critic, right? Like a critic
Yeah.
would point that out, would be like, well, this
Yes.
doesn't make any sense.
That's interesting. I've obviously never met John, and I can't, just from my experience as a Dalkey reader, I can't think of a time when John O'Brien or anyone at the editorial level inserted themselves into one of those books like that.
I think so. There is one other book that's called LC by Susan Deitch that has like footnotes commenting upon the text in a way that like Boylan's book does a little
Mhm.
bit, but not exactly. Like more like critical. Like there are two different narratives again, but like in a more like this is wrong, this is not true sort of way. Because it's like if I remember, I spent 25 years, but like that LC is based a little bit on like a historical document, and then the footnoter is like, this is fucking not true, right? Um,
Huh.
so I think there's like a precedent for that, but I thought that also spoke to this idea of like a book written by a critic is different than a book written by someone who wants to be a writer.
No, you're right. I mean, well, that's curious because I don't believe this is true. I think the best critics like being critics, and it's a calling, and it's something they take very seriously. And I've always loved that. But there's maybe, from a writer's point of view, there's probably this protective thing that writers have of like, critics are just failed writers who wish they were writers, and that's why they're so, they're so thorough and
Yeah.
negative sometimes. I mean, I don't believe that's true. I think that's a little bit of a dismissive thing that writers sometimes say out of just pain for getting a bad
Yeah.
review. But at the same time, she literally she wanted to be a critic, obviously, or she seems to have devoted herself very seriously to it. But she clearly wanted to be a writer too because she wrote a book.
Yeah.
So I don't think that she is. It feels like there's something about those footnotes that's really interesting now that I'm learning about this. That is her, the critic. Um, she can't turn that off. Maybe I want to believe that it's kind of this like beautiful postmodernist thing where she is sort of creating another layer of doubt on the narrative in a way that's really clever that I haven't ever thought of before. But it could just be that she couldn't turn her critic hat, like she couldn't take her critic hat off long enough not to comment. That's also curious.
Absolutely. There's also this note, this mysterious note in the acknowledgments that says there's the enduring presence of Caroline Walsh, 1952 to 2011, who so often asked me to write her a story, and I finally did. And I think like somehow, like when I read that the first time, I was like, is this person the inspiration for this book? And could they be tied in? I don't know. I think I mean, it's interesting because like reading it, I was like, I like reading. I enjoy reading this. I have no like, no nothing, but also like you're right. Like it's doesn't like it's not flashy. It's not like so evidently like postmodern. Or to transition this into a question that you had before we
Mhm.
started talking about this, like it's not obviously a Delkey book
Yeah,
by
that's the thing.
whatever that means, which we can
Yeah.
we can
We
plug. Let's assume that that introduction runs at some point in time.
Yeah, I asked you that question. I suggested it as a possible theme because I know myself as a fan of the press, the things that, of course, the books that I was drawn to initially were probably the stranger, if I can use
Right.
that kind of simplistic term, things that stay in my head is like, wow, Dalkey would take a chance on a book that, like, who else would take a chance on a book like this?
Super
And
weird.
yeah, and this is a book that somebody in theory would have taken a chance on that didn't have to be a Dalkey book. Is maybe
No.
way I'm thinking of it more, but that does not make it not a Dalkey book. It's very much a book that maybe, in a sense, maybe it's a Dalkey book because it has that, I hate to say flatness to the story that maybe an editor at a conventional press, if I can say that, would have been like, oh, you need to really like drum up the drama here. You really need to like
Right.
add more here. And that's why it is actually maybe more of a Dalkey book than I initially thought for that reason.
That's really interesting because like when you had asked that question, like just to spoil, I mean, I don't even know, hypothetically spoil. There's like a intro that I wrote for this book, Chapel Road by Louis Paul Boon, which I'm not pronouncing right, and fuck you, Belgium and Flemish. But the like I wrote it just the other night, right before like you sent that message, basically.
Hmm.
In which you said you'd like to talk about like why, like what is a Delkey book and how broadly like this doesn't seem like one, but it sort of fits within, it's Delkey, but like it's not in a lot of ways. And maybe Delkey's catalog is broader than I thought it was, sort of idea to put words in your mouth. And I just written this intro that was basically like everyone's always talking about like what makes a Delkey book. And like it's kind of a silly idea, but like John did say several times, like a Delkey book is a book published by Delkey.
Huh.
Period.
Perfect.
It's a tautology, but like that's it. And like on some level as a publisher, I really can relate to that because people are like, what's an open letter? Or this is an open letter book. And like we're small. We only have like, 160, 170 books, whatever it is now,
Mhm.
compared to the 1,000 books from Dalkey, literally 1,000 books, right? So it's very small. And at the same time, there's like some need to like identify a press with a certain type of book or a certain title. Like Zone is usually one for us. Merce Rotoreda, now more Winter and Sakcho, maybe
Mhm.
Frazan. There's like a handful that like get identified as like open letter authors, right?
Yeah, but now that you're sort
But
of we're on this road, I'm thinking of open letter books too, because the open letter books that I usually think of in my head when I think of your press, like some of my favorites, like Vilnius Poker,
oh,
and th these are some oddballs.
that has a
Yeah.
dog speak in it though. That's a dog
Oh,
speaking it.
yeah, but it's different. That's a guy reincarnated as a dog. It's okay. But
Wait,
yeah.
what? Less
Maybe.
realistic. No, I love that book, and I'm okay. No, I'm not okay with that. But like, I do love that book. I do love it.
But it's a
Violates my
strange
terms.
one.
Proof
I,
or whatever exception that proves the rule.
there you go. There you go. Yeah. So you let one through. But even there's some strange ones. I've talked to you many times about Maidenhair and
Yeah.
my weird like relationship with that book that I just like I still don't really know what I think of that book. So there's a certain kind of quality to all of those. But I'm struggling. There's got to be a book or two that I know I've read that's an open letter book that's also far more conventional than those two examples.
I would say like some Andres Newman's books are very conventional
Yeah. Okay.
in many ways. I think that like Elisa Shuodusipin, who's like our top selling book of all time that won the National Book Award, is a much more quasi conventional book. It's a quiet book. It's a very like interesting book and does interesting things. But like I think if you threw it out there without a label on it, I tried to do this experiment once where I had a bunch of presses send in manuscripts of forthcoming books with everything that you could identify them as stripped. And then Anthony was going to give them to me in random order, and I would read them and evaluate them and like make judgments on them and like make assumptions and guess, but not knowing who the author was, not knowing who the translator was, not knowing what the title, the author, and any the publisher, no information, right? Just a
Hmm.
pure text. And the problem was, and it led to problems on the road, was that the first two I basically guessed correctly. And they were both New Directions books of that like series of like small, thin books that was going to come out. And I
Yeah.
fucking hated both of them and was like really aggressively didn't like them. And was like, this sounds like some Yoko Tawada bullshit. And then it was like, that was the book.
It
And
was
I like,
Kyoko Tawada.
ugh. I mean, fine, she's fine, whatever. I don't, it's not my thing, but that's that. But I don't like her for the same reasons people love her. So we're all on the
Yeah.
same page. It's just not my thing. But like it really just kind of soured my relationship with New Directions momentarily
Wow.
because like I publicly wrote about these things and then it turned out to be exactly that. Um, but I love that idea of like you could take some of our books and give them to people with everything stripped from it, and you may or may not recognize them as quote unquote open letter books. However, the reason that you publish books as a publisher and editor isn't explicitly to follow like some narrow defined aesthetic rule. It is like based on like passion and love and connection. Like, you know, we like John did these books by Nick Wadley called like Man Plus Dog, Man Plus Doctor. What are the other ones? There's two more, but I can't think of the names. But Men Plus Book, I think, and they
Hmm.
are like sketches, like drawings, like cartoons, with like maybe a saying in them, and that's it. That in no way is a Dalkey book. They're published as
Yeah.
hardcover, like coffee table books. But Nick Wadley, who I'm literally looking at an article he wrote about Stephen Temerson, was the one of the people that helped manage Stephen Temerson and Geber Bacchus's press's
Hmm.
archives, and was like someone that I met with several times with he and his wife Yasa Reichart, whose book is also published by Dalkey. And they were the most lovely, amazing people. And
Hmm.
John really loved them, like truly. And I remember being in the back of a taxi cab with him leaving their house in London. And he was just like, you know, sometimes you just do books because you like someone. Like sometimes we
Interesting.
just do books because we like people. And like that becomes then a Delkey book and becomes part of the mythos. And it
Hmm.
is based on that sort of vision, right?
I mean, you're right. Even New Directions, who mentioned earlier, that's kind of a legacy press for small presses, and they have the backlist that's amazing. But if I were to think of New Directions books, and I do love that press, you think of names like, okay, they published Dylan Thomas, they published Ezra Pound. You think of like these great writers of that
I don't
era.
think you're supposed to talk about Ezra Pound anymore.
Well, I know, but they do publish them, and there's no getting around that there's a big fat Cantos sitting on my shelf.
Yep.
But even like those are the big names, but they're like the people they're publishing today, they're still going strong. But if you really think about it, they've got some books that are very, I guess we keep using the word conventional. They have books that don't fit into like a similar aesthetic, but they kind of do. So it's
Yeah.
just it's interesting to think of how like you can be really strict about this like ethos that you have. We're going to do only this kind of a thing, and then it almost feels very limiting, where it's just like, well, this book isn't avant-garde enough, so we
Yeah.
can't put it out, even though it's a solid book. that's well written, that's maybe hilarious or really, really clever or engaging, but it doesn't quite like play with form enough or something like that. And it just feels like that's incredibly restrictive. So why would you do that in a way? So if there's an aesthetic that like New Directions, Dalkey, any like New York Review, like any of these books that these publishers that I follow and that I'm really interested in have, I don't know that I can put my finger on it, but I do understand that Dalkey kind of has this reputation of being like, who else but Dalkey Archive would put out Bottom's Dream, in this like incredibly big and beautiful and expensive thing that's now worth, if you go online, you know,
$5,000. I'm going to sell all my
somebody wanted
copies.
to charge me that because I didn't buy a copy when it was out. I waited it out like, oh, I'll get it next week, and then I can't find copies anymore. And the one person I know in Chicago has a copy who does not want it because she does not like that book and couldn't finish it, and kind of got suckered into buying it. Wants to charge me thousands of dollars that I've refused to pay her because she claims she bought it used, but I think that's bullshit. I think she paid $75 like everybody else and just wants to profit.
Yeah, I have two copies of it. One of it's sitting up there. It's in near mint condition, as close as you can get with like a box that was wrapped. If anyone's listening to this podcast, I have some medical bills. If you
So
want to like help a brother out, you know how to reach me. I'm
Venmo Chad.
eminently Googleable. Yeah, no, don't Venmo me. Like, contact me first because, like,
Okay.
I don't want multiple people Venmoing me. I only have one copy, but I'm not willing to part with it. Um,
But still, that book is, I
that
mean,
book
if
is
you,
like the extreme, like what I think people think of Dalkey being is.
yes, yeah, yes, yeah, that is the
I
kind
don't
of
think
book.
that's true.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you it's probably just because the first Dalkey book I remember reading, although I probably read early books that were Dalkey books earlier, didn't think about the press. But I remember specifically thinking this is interesting. Who put this out? Is Night by what's her name? Rudin is her
Bertrana
name?
Rudin. That
Yeah,
was one of
that's
my
yeah.
books. I
Was
fucking
it? Okay.
love that book. It's got a fucking testicle on a tongue on the cover, man. That's
Yeah.
if you're gonna say Chad book, that's gonna be it.
But I bought it from a store in Chicago that wasn't open for very long, and she had nothing but like she had three presses represented. Dalkey, one of them, she's like, "Well, I'm just going to stock what I like," and spoiler, that didn't last.
That
Of
was
course,
near
it didn't
Evanston,
last.
right?
Yeah, yeah, that was Left of Center Books over in
Oh yeah.
Edgewater, yeah, near Evanston, where I was living at the time. But now that and suddenly when I read it, I'm like, "Oh, I've read. Thank you for not reading." So I did, but I didn't make the connection to the press. And then that's when I started to put together like, oh, I should pay attention to this press because they're putting out some really interesting stuff. But it did kind of form in my head like a Dalkey book is, I don't know, Eastern European and mildly avant-garde and kind of like
Voice driven.
Celine-like. What's that? Yeah,
Voice.
voice driven, exactly. And that's obviously not the totality of what you guys have done.
Yeah, I mean it isn't. And Bottom Stream might be like a pinnacle of one element of it, and it's the one that's the most broaderist in a sort of sense because it is like it's a big book that you can't get through, and like the people I know that have, I think there's like three that I know that have or know I have seen online who have finished it, and of the three, they're all like, that was fine, like that was an experience. Would I recommend that experience to everyone? Probably not. And like having read parts of it and having read Arno Schmidt, like I think Arno Schmidt's super interesting, like very technically, like
Hmm.
fascinating, like the what he's doing to like create his own branch of like literary history is fucking remarkable. And Delkey did exist to support the branches of literary history that had nothing underneath them. And to put them onto a trunk so that they could survive. So like there is like enough the Flann O'Briens, the Sorrentino maybe not a bestseller, but like was very important. Like using like the Svetlana Alexievich, Voices from Chernobyl is not necessarily the most experimental of books. It's a oral history, right? Like in many ways, and sort of conventional within that form of like Polish reportage, even though she's not Polish. But you use what you have as and the constellation you build. Like you build a number of a base, a tree. I'm gonna go with this metaphor. You build a base out of like these seeds of like uh, Douglas Wolfe, out of Ralph Cusack, who
Hmm.
we're going to talk about at some point in the future, out of Sorrentino, out of William Gass. You have these seeds of like, what is it that you want to build? Tristram Shandy, James
Hmm.
Joyce, like this idea of form being related to content. And then you make your thing, and then you can support Bottom's Dream because people buy Bottom's Dream because it's connected to this larger constellation of writers. John always liked to talk about a constellation, but I think I like better like this tree metaphor at this moment in time.
That's good. I like that idea of a tree because that implies, I guess both do imply the connectivity of all these things. And there is maybe like one thing like a lodestar that kind of grounds you in a weird way. And
Yeah,
there's probably and there probably is. I mean, this is we're getting way off, but like
that's
since we're on the
okay.
history of Dalkey, like what's the is who was the first Dalkey book? Do you know? You must
Yeah,
know.
I do. It is I can tell you for certain before I fuck this up, but it's Splendid Hotel.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right, that makes sense. So,
Um
yeah.
but outside of that, like that's obviously the first one because that was like his good friend at that point in time
Hmm.
and was like everything that he wanted to do uh was there. And there's somewhere in the Mining the Dalkey Archive, which I assume some people are following because you're listening to this podcast. And the thing they did of like the 40 years of Dalkey, and
Hmm.
the very first intro thing has a letter from him to Sorrentino and Sorrentino back to him that includes like a document that's like a poster, not a poster even, like something like a flyer they would send out to like academics or whatever libraries saying this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this sort of book. We're going to do this magazine, the Review of Contemporary Fiction. It's going to cover these writers, and
Hmm.
those writers are the writers that were the first writers that
Okay.
the press ends up publishing, right? Um, and so it makes sense that like he sticks with certain things. So the very first book, obviously, Splendid Hotel, then Wall to Wall by Douglas Wolfe, then Season at Quill by Michael Stevens, which is quasi-Irish, and then Cadenza by Ralph Cusack.
Okay.
And then
So
Some
there's
Instructions to My Wife by Stanley Crawford.
so there's a kind of aesthetic early on, and it just feels like all the ways in which, if we're going to use the tree metaphor, like the branches have sort of sprouted, are related to all that. But it's going to be different. Like there's going to be a lot of things
And
there, and I again, like that's good. Like I kind of like that in a
I do
sense
too.
because how many times do you want to see the same rabbit pulled out of the same hat, right?
I'm sort of getting into this metaphor because it also like implies a growth that there's like people that are descended from people. Like Ben Marcus comes out of Carol Meso. Like
Hmm.
there's like a tree that branches other has other branches. Branches have branches. I don't fucking understand nature. I live in Rochester. It is like it's not like a super urban, but like there's like a lot of not trees around here.
Yeah.
Where I live, but the there's a lot of snow. We don't get growth here. Um, it snowed today. The
Jesus Christ.
don't even tell me I'm like so at the end of my rope. But yeah, I think that that's true. I think that is like there are things that sort of you'd say, well, that's a Delkey book, but I think we're in one way pointing to the seeds that are there, but also in a way it's what you experienced first and what you associate. Because
Yeah.
the Japanese literature series, the Korean literature series, I don't think you would call those Delkey books. If you like looked
No.
at them on their own in the wild, you'd read them and be like, I like these Korean books. What is this press? I have my students doing these reports on presses, and it's remarkable how little research that is done by in terms of like
Hmm.
understanding like the greater concept of these presses. Like they'll
Really?
describe like Grey Wolf books, for instance, which the woman did a wonderful presentation. The presentations have been very fun, but like in terms of like blind spots related to like our interior like book person world, like with Grey Wolf, they did not mention that Grey Wolf won the National Book Award last year
Hmm.
for translation. That would be sort of something to like categorize what is their editorial vision. And I insist that they talk about the editorial vision of these presses. And that's the part on their presentations that falls down the most. Like it's
Hmm.
generally like, well, they do fiction and poetry and sometimes
Hmm.
nonfiction. It's not really like, what are these books? Is there any common thread? And I think in our world that's so fragmented and so TikToky, like we probably don't do that as much as you and I used to. Like I
Yeah.
saw too brands as aesthetic visions that you'd put
Hmm.
forth. And I think with Delkey, there's like two lines to it. There's the press, but also the review of contemporary fiction points to like a larger world. Kathy Acker's never published by Dalkey Archive. There's an issue about Kathy Acker. Um,
Right. So there's this kind of like ongoing. world that surrounds even the stuff we're putting out, that we're a part of this.
Like all we wanted to do was publish Ulysses and Tristram Shandy and never did.
Yeah, of course. But you do have, well, you have a Joyce book, Conversations with Joyce, and you have books like the Ulysses book by the Spanish writer's name I'm forgetting,
Uh,
Rios, I think.
Julian Rios,
Yeah.
Ulysses.
Yeah, but again, like to me, it points to we're not going to be able to publish this because like Vintage will have it, but like we are in the Joyce conversation. Like we are part of this community in a sense. Like we're staking our claim here
Yeah,
to
and
this.
that's part of the influence on the whole scene. So, sort of back ass plug, buy
Uh-huh.
Chapel Road by Louis Paul Boone, so that you can read like my dumbass shit about it, and about this particular topic. And trust me, it is dumbass as all could be. Like it just went hard. Um, but
Oh yeah, should we get to the big ending?
spoilers to go back to this book. What the fuck? She was pregnant?
Okay, so first of all, on the subject of spoilers, yes, you've all tuned out if that matters to you. I kind of subscribe to the theory that nobody really needs, like nobody cares about
This is
spoilers,
the
but
last page of the book, though, and I
but
was
this
just
is
like
the end.
jaw
But this
dropped.
is this is something that was like I was very shocked, and I went back and read 5 pages to see did I miss a clue?
I
Not
okay,
really.
okay,
Only the
I
fact that
did.
she
I
only that she
wait.
vomits a lot is the only thing that I saw. She does
Why
vomit a
does she
lot in this
keep
book.
vomiting? Is my
Yes.
note.
Because she vomits when she's a kid in Virginia. She vomits when she smokes a little weed in Paris before her assault, and then she vomits
Every time she
often.
eats.
Yeah, she's not. So in my head, there's no reason why she's vomiting because she's pregnant. She's just got a queasy stomach,
Ex-
delicate constitution.
Except that she does eat a shit ton. Like every time that she talks about being at a hotel, she talks about the breakfast buffet. Every time she
Yeah,
talks about like being at the horse ranch, she talks about the breakfasts that I made. Like she doesn't describe it in detail. She's not like, oh, the eggs were this or this or this. It was like I went down and I got like 2 pieces of cake, and I went in and I like took all these things back to my room in case I got hungry because I frequently did. And then I would eat this at breakfast, or I'd eat at breakfast. I'd eat.
yeah.
She eats a lot in this book. And then suddenly she's vomiting a shitload and then is like, I woke up and there was a baby in my hands. And someone said, you're too tall to be pregnant.
The
And that's the
fuck.
end of the book.
It's okay. So maybe I've heard of the whole "I was pregnant and I didn't know it" thing. That's like
I
season one
dated
Mad
someone who
Men.
had a kid under those conditions.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Not kidding you. I believed her. I mean, she was a crystal godhead person, but like, I do believe that this was true. However, it was, yeah. And she tried to explain it to me in as close to terms as possible that she found out she was pregnant at like 7.5 months. So she still did
Wow.
not like have a baby. But I also was in a cab once in San Francisco, and this woman got a call and was like, what are you talking about? Like it was like a group taxi to the airport, and it was like her son's wife had a kid that day, and she's like, I don't understand this. Like, how did you not know? And she's like, I have a grandchild. Like it was like this
Wow.
shocking thing. So I think it does happen occasionally, but like,
Sure.
but
It's
like,
it's just it strains credulity, but it definitely happens. I mean, that was the ending. That was season one Mad Men, and I remember seeing that being like, "The fuck you talking about?" And then I looked around. I'm like, oh, I guess this happens. And if you're not aware you're pregnant, you're not, maybe even eat, like you gain a little weight, but they don't just like swell up because they're not eating for two consciously. I mean,
yeah,
there's absolutely, I guess, the possibility. But here's the thing: I honestly believe that this is a realist novel in which this happens. But for a second, I'm like, did she die in her room? And this is some sort of like deathbed
Jacob's ladder.
vision. Yeah, like it's a Jacob Ladder scenario. Yeah, exactly. For How Did This Get Made fans. Uh,
Oh,
it,
that's a throwback too. You're on my same wavelength.
yeah, well, it's a great
I
pod.
was talking
Yeah.
about that with the Hong Kong book. The new Hong Kong book is a fucking Jacob's Ladder.
Is
Also,
it?
also sucks. Also shitty book.
Oh,
But that's okay.
okay. But I don't know. I don't think that's what's going on here. But
I don't either.
that is my. I thought, well, maybe this is her like dying because she's talking about dying prior to this. She's just like maybe if the
Wants to kill
Stasi shoots
herself.
me, yeah, she seems suicidal. And I thought, okay, did she kill herself? And this is like some deathbed vision. I'm like, no, that feels really out of place with the book. If that's the case, you don't introduce something like that on the second to last page.
No, I think that I felt like it was like a true moment, but also that she's so like this is where it's like lacuna. Like she never seems to have sex in this book.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is I tried to remember, did she actually sleep with that guy at the
She
ranch?
does sleep with him. She
Yeah, I
sleeps at his
forgot.
house, but she's like, I really like holding hands. Like I'm very into like romance. And at one point she's like, I kind of looked at the guy and was like, that guy's kind of sexy. I would
Yeah,
like to fuck him.
yeah.
And then she's like, that's weird. I never think about that. That's not my thing. Push it aside. She's also like I wonder, I don't know this. Maybe I shouldn't even say this, but like, I wonder how much like in relation to one's like anatomy and like processes, horse riding on an extreme level that she's doing it, like
Hmm.
makes things irregular to the point that like she's not necessarily like tuned in to like, oh, I have missed my period for 7 months, 8 months, or whatever. Like she doesn't seem
Hmm.
aware of that kind of stuff. Like she
Yeah.
does reference at one point in time that like Lone Star,
Hmm.
which I do have to say, fuck that name. Like I wasn't too super into that when this girl at the ranch in France is like, my name is Lone Star. I come from Texas. I was like, make me puke a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
no, no, thank
Yeah.
you. But is this obnoxious girl? She does reference at one point, like, I'm gonna need to get to town because I need some tampons.
Yeah.
And then our narrator, Helen, never, ever mentions
Nope.
anything bodily functions at all in terms of like female anatomy. I mean, there's bodily functions with the guy pissing on her, but other than that, like that's not like part of her world. She's obsessed with horses,
Yeah.
and she's obsessed with painting, and like kind of trying to find her way a little bit. And it's basically, like, I don't want to go home. My dad's kind of a dick. Maybe I could go home. I have a lot of money. I could do anything. I'll live in Germany. I want to go see these paintings.
Yeah.
Oops, I have a kid.
I want to die, but this thing now saves me from dying. It's
I
my
do
new,
think that she
I have a
wanted to die
purpose.
by gunshot. I think she was like, I
Yeah.
want to die by cop.
Yeah. And then now she has a reason to live, which
Hmm.
is, well, my last thought when I was reading it after that, like, well, what the fuck happened was, well, how long until this kid's dead? Because
Ooh.
everything seems to die around her. So I thought it's a
Well,
happy ending. But there's a part of me that's just like, you're cursed, Helen. This kid's gonna, SIDS, this is gonna happen. It's
oh
gonna
my God.
happen.
Oh my God.
So, as dark a thought as that is, that was my worry is like, don't give her a kid. The dog died next to her overnight. Like all these things happen just so randomly in her life that don't
We didn't
give
ever
the
even
kid
talk.
away.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the other random one is who's probably the father? Question mark.
Yeah.
Um,
How did he die?
what is his name?
Matthew or I can't pronounce
Meth.
French word. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
why, you know what? I knew what his name was, but I wanted to see if you'd say it first.
it's the French, whatever the French for Matthew is, let's just
Yeah,
say.
French Matthew, who works at the horse farm and is like really dedicated to horses too. It's this verges like it edges up to the idea of a theory I used to have where like books that are about a particular hobby never make sense because there's
Mhm.
not that many people who are into that hobby within your
Mm,
life sphere. So like there's like a book by oh God, what's his last name? Use Elishkovsky maybe.
mm.
Might be wrong, but it's called Say Cheese. And it's about everyone being like a photographer. And I was like, there's not that many people in a photographer. It's like those old like 80s movies that are like everyone's a ballroom dancer in the town. The
Yeah.
little small town has a ballroom dancing like, championship. And you're just like, get the fuck out. Like this is like unrealistic in a way that like I'm glad that MFA's rooted that out or like
Mhm.
Netflix rooted that out of writing rooms. But at the same time, like, I don't know, it's kind of fun. But like everyone's into horses. Everyone's so into horses. At least she centers that in spaces where horses are prominent. She
Yeah,
goes
it
to a
makes sense.
racetrack and meets people who are into horses. She goes to a horse farm and they're really into horses. Okay, great. Totally works. But this dude's like way into horses, very pretty, and then like the big twist, like he falls in love with her. She then convinces herself she's in love with him. They
Yeah.
go out to a movie that she sleeps through, which is a movie from 1988, which is where that really in that and the wall existing in East Berlin are what centers this as a book taking place in
Yep.
88 and 9 specifically at that point anyways. They fall in love. She spends some nights with him, and then he either gets hit by a horse or falls or has a stroke or who knows. He just like she's riding the horse, and she's like, "Come on, man, come on, Matthew," and he's like dead. And then
Dead.
you find out that he had been married to the owner of the stables, um, daughter, who's like this very pretty face but very like clunky body, according to our narrator. And they had a kid that died. So there's
Mhm.
your kid. So I think her kid lives because I think it's the anti that.
Oh, okay.
Like
That's
as the
good.
parallels, there's a kid that he has that dies. He dies so the kid can live. Question
Hmm.
mark. I don't know what
I
that
don't
means,
know.
but like as a
The
structure, it makes sense.
Sure. I think I was just worried because she just seems to bring like the plague with her everywhere. Like people are going to die mysteriously, so I'm concerned. But maybe yeah, we'll look for a hopeful angle, which is that he had to die so that this child could live and save her. Because it does save her. I mean, she's pretty suicidal for the last 15 pages of this book. And then just when you think that I'm pretty much I was really ready for that ending, and then this happened. I'm like, what the fuck? Okay, I guess
When
she's
she
gonna
went to
live
the
now.
when she went to the graveyard in Dresden to find our
Yes.
painter name, whose name I keep forgetting, he find his grave. I was like, oh, she's gonna like take something.
Yeah.
She's gonna like off herself in some way here. Like I think the exact quote, she's like, if I had wanted to continue living, I would blank, blank, blank. And I was like, wait a second, like that's a red flag. That's something that
Yeah.
we start calling that suicide hotline and being like, my friend's got some issues. But then she doesn't, like you say, she just gets like sick, but that sickness is childbirth.
Yeah. It makes sense now why she's sick. And when she goes back to her hotel and the like concierge is just like, "Oh, what's wrong with your clothes? You're," and she even makes reference to like rushing to the elevator because she stinks and
Smells
she's
like a hobo.
filthy. And I just was like, is it because she's been sleeping in like dirt and just riding trains and filthy? I guess. But now I get the sense that she's covered in vomit and she's just disgusting because even if you walked in kind of filthy, I don't know that anyone would stop you and call up to your room and be like, "What's wrong with you?" But if you're walking and covered in your own fecal matter or urine and vomit, then obviously the concierge is going to be like, "Hey, everything okay?" But
Yep.
which it made more sense because I didn't even get that moment. I'm like, "Why are they calling her up? Like that feels odd." But no, it makes sense because she's in labor and she's leaking bodily fluids.
God. I mean, what a weirdly, I mean, I really, in the end, like reading this, I was like, and I read a lot of it. I read most of it over this past 4 days before we were recording this on like Thursday, April 10th, even though it's going up later than that. I read it all in such a rush and I enjoyed it. But then now talking about it, I think I fucking love this book.
Yeah, it's only getting better the more I think about it. I was reading it for a while. I took a break from it like a week ago and then kind of finished it today. And it was sort of like the moment that I think as soon as she leaves Virginia, I'm really locked in. Like I like everything in
Yeah.
the beginning of it, but it really gets strange and kind of almost like a picaresque novel in a sense where she's just like going from adventure to adventure on her like living on her own wits. And that really was exciting when she gets to Europe. So I got really happy that I was sort of reading the last few days of this thing when I picked it up again and finished it today. But I think you're right. The experience of reading it was not unpleasant. But now that I'm thinking more about it, and we're talking about it, I'm like, I really have more admiration for this book than maybe I had like an hour ago. Because it
Same.
does feel like it's subverting a lot of the standard things a novel can do, but not in an incredibly like showy postmodernist way.
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's so subtly good. Um so far we've done like what's interesting is in some ways we've done two Americans in this
Hmm.
series and one Irish person.
Yep.
And this book is set in America. The other ones have all been set in Ireland, but or this America, France, and Germany, obviously. So the next choice for our Irish podcast series is yours, Vince. What is it going to be?
I think we're doing John Toomey's Sleepwalker, which is a book that I read years ago, a long time back, and have a memory of. That's a very fond memory. But I honestly can't tell you. Like if someone said like, "Oh, what's Sleepwalker about?" I haven't looked at this book since I read it, and I don't remember. So I'm really excited to read it again because I have a sense of what it's about, but I'm curious to see if I'm sure it will hold up, but if my love of this book is going to be in place the second time around.
It came out in 2010. Um,
Okay.
from Dalkey. So if you read it around that time, that is a good 15 years ago,
Yeah,
right?
it's been a minute.
He has two other books from Dalkey, Huddleston Road, which was done as a hardcover and as a paperback, and is from 2012, and then a book called Slipping, which was done as only a paperback in 2017. He was a friend of John's, and helped him with the Irish office. So I think John Toomey might be willing to come on the podcast. Maybe he'll hear this and be like, "Sure, I'll come do it." But he's always been super responsive. He's seems like a great guy. Sleepwalker is a funny,
A fart,
smart, intuitive book by is Colin McCann's quote about it. There's a John Waters quote on the back.
not the
Magnificent,
filmmaker.
not to film it. Come on, man.
Yeah.
Let me get away with this. A little bit of little bit trickery. A little
Never
bit
mind.
of
It is the filmmaker. Yes.
come on, man. Give me a grift. I got a grift. Magnificent Dispatch from the Republic of Boredom. Can't praise it enough. And this one's actually an Irish writer set in Ireland, I believe. So
Yeah.
nailed it.
There
Uh,
you go.
good, good.
Uh,
So we're going to do that next in May. And I think because we're going back and forth on this, and because if you are following along and want to read along, for one reason or another, I think the book that we're going to do after that is called, I don't know,
Grattan.
Gratin,
I don't know. Yeah.
and Me by Tom O'Neill, which is a book that was recommended to me years ago, and did not read, and it is very linguistically challenging. It's from 2017, and we'll go with those. But I'm excited to read Sleepwalker. I've had all of his books on my to read shelf. That's why I could grab them so
Oh,
quickly, for months or years now.
have you not read them? I've read all three.
Never read any of them. It's brand
I
new to me. I've been meaning to. I think John, the to me, the times I've interacted with him, he's been like the sweetest person and like very kind,
oh
very like helpful. I've a sweet spot. I think there was something you said about like something got screwed up with the printing of Slipping, perhaps, that didn't have like a certain like design element that he had hoped for that maybe if we can reprint it can fix. So I'm kind of curious. I might read all three of his books and just give this a full on John Toomey experience.
okay. I know I read all three. Sleepwalker is the first, so maybe that's why it sort of has I'm the fondest of in my memory. But I remember liking all of them. And again, it's the same. We'll have this conversation again, even maybe with him. They're not the Dalkey book in that same sense. They're fairly conventional, but they're doing things that I think are really interesting. And the writing is really what I paid more attention to, like just the actual quality of what was on the page. I thought, especially with Sleepwalker, was really striking. So I'm excited to read it again. That's for
Me
sure.
too. Me
So
too.
can I?
So
So can? Oh, go ahead.
go on.
I was going to ask, like, I know we've been talking for a bit, so we may not have a ton of time for the other thing we're going to do, but at the very least, you pointed out that like there's not a ton of women Irish writers on the Dalkey series. Is there any particular like? I don't think there's any reason for that except just happenstance. But like, I know you were very conscious of that, which is why I was talking about all the other great Irish women writers that I love. Is that something we should chat about for a second? The
I
fact
think it
that like
is.
Dalkey is a little
I think it's
underrepresenting.
definitely what we should talk about. The one that stands out to me was Dorothy Nelson, who we reprinted when I was working there the first time. Tar and Feathers and oh my God, a night, something with the word night in the middle of it. Night and day, night and dark, dark and night. God damn it. She was like what I thought of as like a conventional sort of Irish writing of like a very abusive family, drunken, tough going, make it
Mhm.
through, find strength. It reminded me of Eimer McBride when that book, Girl is a Half Formed Thing, came out. And I read that. I was like, oh, it's just Dorothy Nelson. But like, I'm curious. So I do think that like there's Christine Dwyer Hickey is
Yep.
another one that Delkey has published. That's a female Irish writer. Bridget Brophy, one of my
Mhm.
all-time favorites, who's like fucking amazing and underrepresented and does fit the Delkey idea. But that's probably the extent of my knowledge of like female Irish writers from Delkey Archive.
Hmm.
John did lean very male,
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I'm not shouting it out as a criticism, but it's interesting because you pointed it out, and
but
I
it
didn't even
is.
think about that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a thing. It's the reason why I know. what I know about Irish women writers is because I literally took a class in undergrad called Irish Women Writers by a teacher who has become kind of was my mentor, Professor Ellen O'Brien. And she just knows, and she said, "All right, we're going to do a whole semester on this." And we read some fantastic
Cool.
stuff. And so, but even beyond that, it feels like there's such a tradition of literature writing, especially poetry in Ireland, and it's represented across the genres. I mean, there's definitely a lot of fantastic male writers that we can and have talked about, but the women, I mean, in Ireland are bringing. You mentioned Emma McBride. I mean, A Girl as a Half-Formed Thing is kind of a that like I've read all of her books now, and that's the one to read if you're going to read them. But
Yeah,
it is kind of like
100%.
it was a big book when it came out for me
Yep.
because I was just like somebody's really fucking with language in a way that is so conscious. Like there's nothing about this book from the story point of view that should be revolutionary. It's just really the way this book is told, the way the story is told, that elevates it beyond because it is otherwise just like typical Irish trauma, trauma porn almost of just
Yeah.
poverty and abusive mother and handsy uncle. It's the same kind of tropes. But if you're gonna do that, like do it in a way where you're just literally tearing language apart.
Yeah. Shouts to Coffee House for publishing that too.
Yeah, that's a great one. So,
So
but it's
what other female Irish writers are you going to recommend here?
so I'll do it quick. Like the one
As
that
we
I'm,
as we lean into a sausage fest for the next 2 weeks.
yes, we're
Next
gonna
two
do some
months.
more sausage, but and obviously these aren't
Chorizo,
Dalkey books, but these are maybe
mash,
For
bangers.
Dalkey fans. Yeah, banger books. There we go. If we can't get, let's make it slightly pornographic. A banger
Banger,
books.
a
Yeah, a
banger
banger
bucks, banger
fest.
bucks,
Yeah.
banger fest. God, we're
I
gonna
think
be
like the most
oh,
Dalkey. I was trying to think of not quite like a typical Dalkey book, but like Dalkey readers would possibly enjoy these. The first one is going to be the hardest to find. It's by Mary Dorsey called "A Noise from the Woodshed," which is
oh,
a short story collection from Only Women Press, which I have
holy
no
shit,
idea what the fuck that is,
that's
but
awesome.
it's really interesting, and it's labeled as Radical Feminist and Lesbian Press Publisher. So
Oh,
there you go. But this book is one of the ones that we read a couple of the short stories in the class. And the title story, Noise from a Woodshed, is just it's a striking story where it's one of those, again, very little happens, but it's just gorgeously written in a way that's just digressive and hypertactic and strange and that kind of like Joycean circulating prose that where tropes return and it's like repetition is turned into an art form. I remember reading it and thinking like this is amazing. Like this is what I'm locking into. And like that's probably my top recommendation. So again, it's a book that you're gonna have to order. I don't think it's gonna pop up in stores. I don't even know where Only Women Press is located. I don't know if they exist
never heard of
anymore.
that.
Yeah, I have no other book in my collection from that press.
Huh.
It's just one of those weird things that this came out. Like she's written some poetry that I'm not as keen on, and those are easier to find. But this is the story collection that I'm like, if you're gonna find anything about this poem, that's the one to look for. So that's my first recommendation. Have you heard of Marina Carr? This is a play
I have
called.
not.
So she's still active, and this play was kind of big. It's called By the Bog of Cats, and it's a retelling of the Medea myth, yeah, Euripides story, and it's like it had a huge run, and I think like Helen or Holly Hunter, yeah, she actually played the title character in one production. So it's not like this was like an obscure play. It did make an impact, but I have her kind of collected plays on Faber, but this is the one that I reread about a week or two ago, and it's just as striking as I remembered. It's very rough stuff. It's very fun. It's kind of like if you know the playwright David Ireland, who's a very kind of caustic and strange playwright who I love, who plays a small character in Dairy Girls, is his other claim to fame.
Oh,
It's of the
no, I like
similar kind of like really just black humor kind of play, but really touching stuff. I loved it.
amazing.
Um, and then the one big name, I know there's like two or three others, but the one I have to get to is Maeve Brennan,
Right.
who I think people have heard of. And there's kind of a resurgence in her right now, which I'm excited about in her short stories. But her nonfiction for the New Yorker called The Long-Winded Lady is just like, it's just stories about I'm hanging out in downtown Manhattan. I'm this Irish immigrant in New York. It's very just what I'm observing right now. So there's this kind of cool little, this this column can be anything I want it to be. And the New Yorker published a lot of them. And that collection is really fantastic because I love a good, well-crafted short story as much as the next person. And her stories are very much the traditional, well-crafted short story, but a digressive woman around town just hanging out in a cafe and people watching and reporting on it to me is way more interesting and fun.
Yeah, for sure. God, Jesus, those are great recommendations. And I don't know any of them. I've heard Maeve
Uh,
Brennan, but I do not have never read.
it's great. I think she is getting more attention. Backlisted, the podcast that does
Yeah.
kind of neglected books, they had her short stories as an episode that I listened to. So there is kind of some rediscovering, I guess, of her because I think she just disappeared from like the consciousness. She's kind of like Anne Berg, where it's like she was big and then she did really cool stuff and then she was ignored and now she's kind of back,
And
which I
Berger
always love.
and Quinn,
Damn, whatever. Anne Quinn, the one who wrote Berg.
who wrote Berg.
I always I fuck her name up all the time and call her Anne Berg because I just think of Berg.
We've thrown like the best love to my three of my favorite podcasts in this podcast. So
How did this get made? Backlisted and
if books could kill,
oh, books can kill. So, and
if
I
books
guess
could kill,
I'll give you one last rack because here's a
please,
question for you. So okay, I'm not throwing you under the bus here, but you're not
please
a
do.
big poetry fan, are you?
Oh, wait. To be fair,
Okay.
to again, then reference Letterkenny so we can figure out all my
Oh,
favorite tropes in here. But to be fair, I just finished right before we started this, Adnan, which is a novel in verse that's translated
hmm.
from the Swedish about the Sami population and their reaction to, it goes over like 100 years, and I fucking love it. Like I
Okay.
recommend this book so fully. Think it's amazing. And it is poetry, kind of. But yeah, no, I'm not a poetry person.
It's okay.
I
Yeah,
love listening to people talk about poetry. I don't like reading it.
it's there was a period where I was reading nothing but for several years, and I did get really into it. And a lot of that is because the Irish poets, frankly, like I'm very, if I know the most about any poetry from any region, it's either from Ireland or Chile. Like those are the kinds of
Yeah, yeah.
places where they just make poetry. The joke is that like Northern Ireland produces poets the way that Dominican produces baseball players. It's just like something in the water just leads you to kind of, this is what
Not
you're going to do.
anymore. I think most of those
Well,
baseball players got crushed, but
that's true. Well, once
too
upon a
soon?
time.
Too soon?
Perhaps. But so of all the Northern Irish or Irish poets, like the two that I will give a shout out to is the poet you should never read, Shad, because this will only make you hate poetry more because it's the most like impenetrable, fucking coded
Oh no, I love
thing.
that.
Oh, okay.
That I
There's
love.
this is Maeve McGuckian, and
Okay.
Maeve spelled Medbh, so you have to like pronounce it like this is written in the Irish. This is a book that I read, her selected poems, and I've read a lot of the others. I read it again in college, and I foolishly wrote a paper on this, but there's nothing I could say. I mean, it's just it betrays interpretation, or not betrays, it kind of
Dude,
defies interpretation.
I love that. I love that.
And the way
I
my
think I don't like lyric nature poetry.
You might like her because it's not the thing that I like most about her, they'll say is she has titles for her poems that do not at all give you any insight into the poem.
Good.
And like the way my instructor put it is like the titles are kind of to her little mini poems. So there's a poem called like Pain Tells You What to Wear. And I'm expecting this emo Morrissey thing, but it's not, I mean, maybe a little, but it's not like the poetry, oh, poor me, heart on my sleeve kind
Right.
of thing. But why not have a title with that? Like another one's called On Not Being Your Lover. And, it's clearly kind of a love poem, but I don't know what the fuck's going on. So
Huh.
if there's ever a poet who really betrays easy interpretation, it's Maeve McGuckian, and and she got a lot of shit in the Troubles era for not writing political poems because we're like you're a woman poet, you should be doing what like all these other guys are doing and sort of commenting on this, and she just didn't, and she's like it's not my place, it's not my interest, and she's
Right.
writing about kind of weird domestic scenes that you get a vibe on, but it's still putting my finger on what she's doing is always proved impossible. And that's maybe like I think it taught me to be very comfortable in the uncertainty and that how I'm just okay not getting things in the same way that like I can watch like Twin Peaks The Return and not necessarily or like
A show, right?
RIP David Lynch and sort of not necessarily feel like I need to get like I never went online for the interpretation of Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive. I'm like I think I know what it means and I know enough to be comfortable, but let's just vibe with this thing that's a little bit mysterious.
Anytime that they would sort of ask David Lynch those sort of questions, you'd just be like, I don't know. It's a
It
dream.
means what it means. Yeah.
That's what it means. It is what it is. I love that sort of poetry. I do love like Asa Berg is someone I really
Oh.
like. Kim Hai-soon. Like
Mhm.
those are poets that I really do like reading. I do not like reading poems that are like trying to be poems.
Hmm.
Like in the
Do you?
sense of like trying to be a certain sort of American poem. I guess I don't like Americans.
I don't either,
That's
but
our outtake, isn't it?
it
Like
is. I gave an assignment to one of my like higher level writing classes to do some genre stuff, and I said you can write poems, and we read some that I liked, and I said in my prompt, you know, you can write a poem sequence, and then you have to write a reflection. But I said here are things I dislike in fiction, and here are things I dislike in poetry as kind of a please don't do this. And one of the things in poetry I think was Hallmark card rhymes, because one thing I will say about the best Irish poets from like Seamus Heaney and Kieran Carson, who's my favorite poet, and Paul Muldoon is like they're trying hard to do a lot of slant rhyme and things that are like they're really burying the rhyme 4 lines down, and you got to look for it. So I don't do that. And the other thing is making yourself the hero or wish fulfillment or any of that kind of thing. Like I don't like it in short stories, and I really don't like a lot of poems where it's like I'm going to write a poem that is maybe a notch above a teenage journal's angsty thing.
You know, that's so funny as you say that. Like, what I'm thinking is like this book, to tie it back to this teeth marks on my tongue, is like an anti-main character syndrome book.
Hmm. Yeah, where it's not really giving us. Yeah, I feel like this is a thing that writers do when they're first starting out, and that she's not doing for her first novel. This is admirable. You kind of want like a heroic stand-in for you who's clearly the hero, like unimpeachably good, even if they maybe make a mistake, and we're
Everything
always rooting
revolves
for
around
them.
them.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
that's not interesting, frankly. So, and poets do that a lot, I feel like there's a lot of I have to comment on Trump and Musk and all these things and go for it, but at the same time, it gets to be kind of
Is
I'm pre-wired to root for this, and it's boring as a result.
I think all poetry about Trump and Elon must be really boring because all you have to say is fuck them.
Yeah.
And that's the
What
end of
else?
it. Like you don't have to write any more lines. I don't need slant rhyme. I don't need iambic pentameter. Like you've summed it up. Fuck them.
Yeah. Well, here's maybe a parting question since you know we're going on this
Yeah,
tangent.
we might need to
But
split
we
this in two
this might be
episodes,
two
buddy.
episodes, but we could definitely break soon. But did you read that poem a couple years ago that kind of went viral called "Good Bones" by Maggie Smith?
No, I did not.
I'll send it to you and see what you think because she wrote it's not Maggie Smith the actress, it's a poet named Maggie Smith. And from the sort of like virality of that poem, she wrote a I think a memoir called You Can Make This Beautiful. And it's a line from the poem, and it kind of caught on as a giant poem that like Kara Swisher like read it and had her on as an interview guest. It's like poets don't break through like that. But I kind of like the poem, but it is very much like an American poem in the sense of you're supposed to feel a certain thing when you read it.
Okay.
And I don't hate that example, but I could see it inspires a lot of lesser imitations of people who are like, I'm going to write my poem about motherhood, or I'm going to write my poem about this. And sometimes that's not that fun. So I think I understand your criticism.
My favorite poetry story is that I was at AWP in Minneapolis and some years ago, and Brian Wood, who does the 2 month review, was there with me, and I forget who the other person was that we were hanging out with. And we wanted to get away from AWP. It's a lot of like poetry readings, a lot of author readings, a lot of like things going on. It's a lot of events. It's a lot of people. And like we just wanted to get away. And we're in Minneapolis. And I was like, okay, there's this place called Crooked Pint. It's a good sports bar. It's got Juicy Lucy's, which are hamburgers with cheese infused inside them. You've never had that. Let's go there. Nobody we know will be there. We're good. We were not good. We walked in and there's a poetry reading going on. And the poetry reading, as we sat down, there's a guy up there reading in poetry voice who said, and I tried to smoke a bowl. And my first reaction is like, how do you fuck that up? Like, it's not a hard thing. Like, it's not a
Dude,
difficulty. I don't,
dude,
what are you doing?
it's
Sit down.
it's so I do not like going to poetry readings because almost every time there's a story that like precedes the poem that's way more interesting than the poem. And the other is that when people affect the poet voice, it drives me fucking crazy. And I love poetry and I've written poetry and I like poets and I have friends who are, but when I hear that, it just makes me crazy. And
Yeah, me too.
maybe again, it might be like exoticizing on my part, but maybe the reason I am always attracted to, especially the Irish poets, is like I went to Belfast for a week to what we called poetry camp, and I met all these poets, and you go to these readings, and it was great. Everything was great, and everybody's reading like you're going to read a poem, and sometimes there's a kind of seriousness and pause. And Kieran Carson, my hero, when he read a poem, the guy stuttered. When we read his poetry, he didn't stutter. Like it's amazing. Like you can clearly tell that there is rhythm in like all these the poetry is doing something. But the fucking American poets, they just have that weird affectation that I don't get, and it drives me nuts. Yes.
That's the poetry I don't like. I don't like that. Okay. We should probably wrap this up and
Yeah,
like
we should probably.
continue this continuous. Maybe we should do an Irish poet at some point in a couple months. I'm
Yeah.
down.
All right. All right.
I don't know
Well,
if I don't know if Dalkey published an Irish poet, but like we could figure whatever.
we'll
We'll
figure
bend
something
rules. Who
out.
cares? I'm
Yeah.
super interested in talking about that because I don't like the sort of iambic pentameter sort of beats, like the da 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 da. I think that's what that is. I don't even know. But when poets talk about like how this gets constructed and like what they're up to, I'm fucking locked in. I think
Okay.
that's my favorite part of criticism is that. And like most other criticism, I'm like, okay, yeah, fair, fair, fair. But, you know, critics sometimes are good.
Yeah.
Eileen
No.
Battersby, good.
Clearly interesting critic for sure. So no. Well, I'm
And
glad. Thank you for recommending this. This was good. I'm glad I read it.
good book, good book. So
Yeah.
anyone listening, Sleepwalker, John
Yep.
Toomey, check it out. Get it from bookshop.org under the link that's in the show notes. Get it from your local bookstore. Get it from your library. They need some help. Like give them some numbers and data to work with. So check things out as much as you can. Just check things out, return them. It doesn't matter. Give them data. Um, in the meantime, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Usually, I've gotten a lot of my Spotify's taken out a lot of our podcasts recently because I violated musical terms. So just
Whoops.
FYI, if they're doing some sort of algorithm, I'm going to use a song by the band I Break Horses, which nobody knows and I love from 2010, 2011. So it'll be that. And hey, I Break Horses. If you're pissed that I use your song, you know, email me. Let's chat. I think you're
And I would
great.
have thought I would have thought you would have used goodbye horses for this one, but that's okay.
No,
Too on the nose.
we'll get dinged. They take
Yeah.
down everything, man. Everything. They took down my Sonic Youth podcasts. Everyone that used Sonic Youth has been deleted, which
Ooh,
is like too many.
that's so punk rock for them to take it away from you.
I mean, come on, Thurston.
Yeah, what the
Come
hell,
on,
man?
Kim. Little love. Little love.
Yeah. They're all punks until you hit 40 and have to pay bills.